Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I have to say, it's good to have friends, because I'm here with two great ones to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which just came out in theaters this past weekend. I've got a special guest, Colby Mead of the Colby Cast, which is one of my favorite pop culture podcasts. How's it going, Colby?
I'm so excited to be here, Jen. I thank you so much for having me. You're doing a great job with this podcast. I love listening to it, and I'm so excited that I have an opportunity to be here. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you can be here, because I feel like oftentimes it's me listening to the Colby Cast, and occasionally I get a really generous shout out and I get really excited in my car, but I'm by myself. So now we're all together and it's really great. I also have with me a more frequent co-pilot, the Groot to my rocket, PT McDiff. How are you doing, PT?
On your word, Captain. I'm doing well. I'm also happy and excited to be here. This takes me back to the times I've listened to the two of you talk on a podcast, and I wanted to interject, and now I'll have a chance to do so.
You must be talking about the She-Hulk episode.
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Right. That's the main Marvel conversation I think we had on air. So, which was great. It was an all-timer.
Oh, that's one of my favorite episodes of the Colby Cast, and I can't wait for the sequel to that, because I haven't forgotten. I'm just waiting for some information about Loki season 2, because it's going to be Jen versus Dan round 2, because we have some polar opposite opinions apparently on Loki season 1. So I'm just waiting. I'm biding my time, and I'm gonna bring that out for everybody as soon as I have a chance.
Yeah, that was really funny. I think Dan Z, who hosts Coffee with Kenobi, I think was not prepared for my antagonism to be like, we disagree on this. Let's talk about it. And so, yeah, I'm glad that we shelved that conversation for a future date. All right. So if you're tuning in for our review episode for the first time, and you haven't seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, you don't have to run away. You can listen safely for the first section of our conversation, which is going to be geared for folks who haven't seen the film yet. And after that point, when we can't hold on any longer, we're going to clearly announce that we're heading into spoiler territory. So that's kind of the format we're going to use. So if you haven't gotten a chance to see the film yet, but you want to hear kind of our general impressions without spoilers, we have that here for you. But first, we want to do a really quick movie news check-in. So PT and Colby, have you heard any news in the movie world, seen any new movies, or seen any new trailers recently?
Well, the big news continues to be the Writers Guild strike, which is continuing apace with no real end in sight, I guess. Hopefully that changes, and the people who deserve compensation for their work get compensation for their work. In terms of movie news, the big thing that I saw that I am both excited and nervous about is sort of official announcement of Beetlejuice 2. Which is starting to film next week, and it's coming out in the fall of 2024. It's happening. Tim Burton's directing it. Michael Keaton's in it. The woman who played Wednesday, whose last name is Ortega, whose first name I cannot remember.
Jenna Ortega.
Jenna Ortega, thank you. It will be in it. Unclear exactly who she is, but these legacy sequels are always dicey because I think it could be not good. But it's a world I would love to revisit, and I would love for both Michael Keaton and Tim Burton to be able to bring that magic back.
That sounds fantastic. And I loved Wednesday, and especially, Jenna Ortega as Wednesday is by far the best part about that show. So I'm really, really excited to see her do more Tim Burton.
Have either one of you seen any of the Scream movies with her in it? I'm not a big horror fan, so I don't know, but I hear she does a great job in those too.
I was just going to say, we just watched the most recent one, even though we hadn't seen the one before it, because it was just like one of the new movies on, I think, Peacock. And so we just threw it on, and the Scream movies are very fun. This continues to be a fun installment. If you don't like horror movies, they're certainly it's not like watch it anyway. Don't do that. But yeah, she's great. She's great and very different. Like, she's a regular college-aged girl in those movies, very different from her Wednesday persona. So if there was any concern by anyone who just had seen Wednesday, that was sort of the only window she had. She's really good.
I feel like I have to mention this at least once a podcast. It's like on our bingo card where I'm a total scaredy cat when it comes to horror. So I believe I saw the first Scream movie when it came out in theaters. I'm going to guess I was in high school or something like that, and never again. So.
But then by default, is that your answer to the question, what's your favorite scary movie? Because it's the only one you've seen?
Well, no, I've seen other scary movies. Okay. I've made other mistakes. It's just like Scream 1 was a known quantity where I was like, I get this is making fun of the genre, which is why I think I tricked myself into wanting to go see it, because it was sort of like, it's like a spoof of horror as well as like a straight right, if I remember. Yeah. And so that is what lulled me into a false sense of security. And then I was like, no, there's still legit jump scares and slasher scenes in this. And like, no thanks.
Well, that's one more Scream movie than I've seen, so you've got me beat on that, Jen.
Nice. Okay. To go back to the writer's strike, the news that relates to Marvel, right, since we're talking about Marvel today, Blade, the Mahershala Ali, the name of the True Detective showrunner, whose name I want to say is Piccolo, and it's not.
It's like Pizzoletto, I think?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yes. That's been shut down because of the writer's strike. So I'm starting to be like, is this ever going to happen? Because I feel like before the writer's strike, we had other news murmurs of like, oh, they're looking for the right showrunner. Oh, they're looking for the right script. Like Mahershala Ali is in, he's out. So I feel like I'm just very nervous about that actually coming to fruition.
Movies that have this kind of drama and the pre-production, they don't have a good track record, right, of actually being made. So you think your fear is very much justified. And now this, right? This is the one thing that nobody counted on, is this is going to shut down Blade of all things. So yeah, we'll see. I hope so, because it's such a potentially such a cool character, and Mahershala Ali is amazing. So keeping our fingers crossed. I don't know, I don't follow a ton of this kind of news, but even this is hitting my radar because of how big it is, and it just seems like a very bleak situation. Once you get into these labor situations, if they're not resolved in like a week or 2 weeks, then you're starting to look like, yeah, this is going to draw itself out. And one of the things I found really interesting about the conversation and basically people trying to get information out about this is how important rewrites on the days of shooting has become and is. I didn't know that was a thing, but it makes total and perfect sense. And the example that I saw all over the place really is Quantum of Solace, and what a disappointment of a movie that was compared to Casino Royale, and how it went into production after the writer's strike, and they just sort of shot it as the scripts were written, and they had no writers there to change. And boy, that makes a lot of sense to my brain, and sort of makes me a little nervous, like you, Jen, about Blade, but about like House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon is supposedly going to go forward with filming because they have scripts. So now I'm sitting here thinking about, well, what about the rewrites? And I didn't even know this was a thing 2 weeks ago, right?
This really ties in well with the work that Jen and I do in our day jobs of teaching students. You gotta revise. It's not just getting something down on the page. You gotta hone it. You gotta do the process of making sure that it's clear. And it's, yeah, I mean, in the same way that it's bad when students just like dash off a first draft and turn that in as a paper, probably bad if they're filming the first draft of House of the Dragon, or even like an Andor season 2, which, I mean, I trust Tony Gilroy knows what he's doing, but would love it if they would be able to tweak it and rewrite it now that they're like in the final stages of filming it. So yeah, I think that is a real concern that, there's shows at that last writer's strike. I also have always sort of thought of Quantum of Solace as, I think this came up last time, as one of the examples. And the other one is Breaking Bad. The first season just ends after 7 episodes because they were like, that's all we wrote. We hadn't written the rest of it, so we just had to cut it off there. It was supposed to be 10 or 13 episodes. And, which, I mean, in that case ended up being good because the end of that first season was going to be killing one of the characters that stayed for the whole run. I won't get into Breaking Bad spoilers.
I was going to say, don't be like Madison on She-Hulk. Just spoiling stuff left and
Just
right.
dropping. Oh my god.
Dropping major
Oh,
prestige TV spoilers.
Maybe the best bit of maybe the best Marvel show.
Yeah, it's so good. I love her.
Madison and Wong forever.
Yes, forever. Yeah, so I've been learning a lot more about how the especially the television industry, but more kind of the streaming services at large, which like would be inclusive of television and film. The idea is that residuals are no longer a part of sort of contracts. And we saw this again to tie back into Marvel. We saw this with Scarlett Johansson with Black Widow, right? She rightly so, made a big fuss about this is going straight to streaming because it was during the pandemic, right? And where are the theatrical like just the way that actors or writers would get compensated radically changes once it's like a streaming situation versus like the traditional models that we had before streaming. So that's been a really interesting thing about it. And I've actually had a couple students write who are in the USC Film School, like write some really, really amazing papers about particularly Netflix. Like everyone seems to hate Netflix or blame Netflix for a lot of things, where it's like they're the ones who decided to be like, we don't need to give people residuals. Like, let's just pay people a ton of money up front, and then they don't get anything on the back end, quote unquote, the back end. Meaning, like, traditionally it would be if you wrote a show, if that show was on reruns on network television, you'd keep getting paid every time it aired, right? But now that things are on streaming, they basically just get paid up front, and then they do all the work up front, and then they don't get invited to the set because that costs too much money. Right. And they don't, like, that's the end of the relationship with the show, right? Like that's the, in terms of financials, like they don't get anything after that. So yeah, it's been really interesting learning about this and putting everything in the context of streaming and how it really is kind of like the consumer end has shifted over in largely a positive way, I would say, for us, right? Because we have access to more things more easily. But I guess the sort of economic infrastructure of the film and television industry has not adapted to sort of catch up with that change. So
there's also something interesting, not to have this become the episode about streaming economics, but there's something interesting about how, with film and with, theatrical released film, video rentals and TV ratings, there's some sort of external metric that people can use. There's the Nielsen's, there's, how, the transactions in video stores, transactions in cinema box offices. But with Netflix, it's just sort of this weird like mystery box where they're just like 800 billion people watched this new movie that came out, and it's like, did they? And they're like, yeah. And then the writers are like, do I get paid for that? And they're like, no. You don't. There's no money for that. So it's a weird like how do you even I don't envy the negotiators who are trying to work this out. Is how do you even tie that? Is it to subscribers? Is it do they have to sort of open their engines a little? And there's been a sort of, I don't want to say rumors or because that's sources it even more strongly than I think it is, but there's been some just general speculation as studios have started, like Disney started Disney Plus, Paramount started Paramount Plus, and then those companies are just like, we're making no money from this. We're actually losing a lot of money. Where people are like, is Netflix making money? Like, is this an actual viable business model, or is this like Uber when it was still in that like vast growth stage where it's just this sort of venture capitalist like idea of like, oh, this is going to be great. And eventually it's going to make so much money that it's okay, we're operating at a loss. And maybe they're just operating at these losses that all these numbers aren't real. And then it becomes like, they don't want to expose that. So like, it's almost like even, it's possible that even less than wanting to pay writers for their work, they're worried that like the actual sort of machinations of how Netflix works will be exposed.
I think it's such an interesting conversation, and I don't want to hijack the episode either about this. But again, this is such a 2023 conversation, right? This is a very 2020s type of subject because of the massive shift in how we consume entertainment. And I almost feel like streaming is almost now. I feel like there's a bit of a backlash at it towards. I remember growing up, you would watch a TV show from September to May. It would go away, and then it would come back in September until May, and then it would go away. But now we're watching TV and it's leaving for 3 years. And then we get another season maybe down the road, right? And even the way it's consumed, the economics of it, your viewership point is so interesting to me because I always loved looking at the ratings for TV shows. You sort of knew, like, oh, I can keep watching this show because a lot of people are watching it. It's not going anywhere, but there's nothing. It's like this, like this, just this gas out in the world. You're trying to grab, and it's like you can't. There's no way to know. So, I guess really the final point I have really for the whole thing is that this is sort of like the wild wild west of how we create stories now. No one really knows. Everybody seems to be making things up as they go along, and we'll see what we have this time next year. I don't know.
Yeah, and to segue us into talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, I would say with Marvel in particular, right, we've already seen them kind of go back and forth where we got the deluge of Disney Plus series, most of which I really loved, and I'm not complaining that we got so many in such a short amount of time, but they have very consciously pumped the brakes, right? There's no new show until the end of June. The last one we had was probably I can't even remember now what the last Marvel series that we
I
got
think it was
was.
She-Hulk. And then
Right,
we
which
had,
was a very long
yeah,
time
it
ago.
was fall of last year, and then we had a
Yeah.
couple of the special presentations like
Mm.
Werewolf by Night, and
Oh,
then
that's
the
right.
Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. But right, so we're looking at She-Hulk to Secret Invasion. What is that, 6 8 months? Whereas before we had 6 8 weeks.
Yeah, they never had any downtime. We just started the next show right after the other. And so it's interesting to look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in that context because I think it's almost to me like sort of a leftover from the bygone era of the MCU where the movies were sort of king right before the series came through. But at the same time, I wonder how much this film, because I think it's largely getting very positive reviews, how much is this film going to give the MCU hope of like, oh, we can just like shift back over to movies again, right, and not rely as much on pumping out a bunch of Disney Plus series. Like, it would be interesting to see what kind of balance they strike between movies and TV. So we're here. We're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And so we want to start with the short take, which maybe should be shorter because we spent a long time talking about the writer's strike. But what were both of your general impressions? So let's start with Colby. You're one of the few people who keeps up with the MCU as vigilantly and with as much dedication as I do. So how did this movie land for you?
I really liked it. I really really liked it. And there'll be a little bit more context here when we start talking maybe about how it sizes up against other MCU films. I know that we will hopefully we'll get to. But one thing that I really try hard at is to have zero expectations, and I fail miserably most of the time. I just During phase one of the MCU, I could not stop consuming information about it. I was clicking on all the clickbait articles. I was trying to gobble up everything. Oh my gosh, Thor 2 has hired this writer and it's going to go into production. And I found myself not enjoying the films as much when I was consuming so much of that info. So I cognizantly at that point said stop, like backtrack a little bit here and go back to being a fan of these movies because you really enjoyed phase one, and now phase two is coming along. And even though the sort of the general consensus is that it was a bit of a drop off, I blamed myself more than anything else because I just couldn't get enough of it. So I came up with this idea: zero expectations, ride the roller coaster, don't drive the roller coaster. And I found myself enjoying things way more that way. So again, I don't always succeed and see phase four comments later in the podcast or listen to what I've said on the Colby cast. But this one, I felt like I even lowered my expectations because of the trailers. I was preparing myself to be heartbroken, shattered. They have people screaming at unseen things with tears and angst and anguish. And I'm like, I don't want this. I don't want this. I'm going to go see it, but I don't want this. And I'm not going to spoil anything because we're in the non-spoiler part. But uh, I was pleasantly surprised that I didn't get that. So that based alone, the fact that it was funny and upbeat and heartfelt, yes, exceeded my expectations. If that even counts for anything, because I tried to lower them, right? So, but I found it to be quite enjoyable. And just as far as just quick general impressions. It wasn't as heavy as I thought it was going to be. I thought of course, the music again was a home run. James Gunn and his music, they're just, it's so good, so good. We'll get more into that, I'm sure. And I really, really, really enjoyed the ending. I thought it was very smart the way that they ended this movie. So
that's the tease for the spoiler section if you're listening. Yeah, and I totally agree with you that I feel like in a lot of ways the way this film approached the story made it much easier to sort of let go of expectations and just sort of like enjoy the ride for what it was, because it didn't really feel like it was trying bending over backwards to plug into other things or anything like that. It really was just really focused on this set of characters, which I really liked. PT, how about you? So you have said on this podcast, in fact, that you're someone who's not, you've cooled from Marvel, right? You're not as into the MCU as maybe you once were. So how did this affect that attitude at all?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm definitely in the, not. I think everyone has a I don't want to say a limit because that's not fair. Everyone has sort of a zone when they can get in the red and they maybe hit Marvel fatigue. And there's a bunch of people who have not gotten there, even with all the material, and that's great. I didn't understand the people I knew pre Endgame who hit that point. I was like, this is all great. What are you talking about? And then after Endgame, there was a little bit of like, okay. And I kind of hit it. We can discuss, is that a product of Phase 4? Is that just a product of the world around Phase 4 that maybe made it a little bit harder? But yeah, I had a blast with this movie. I was really into it, very much like Colby, even coming from a different perspective. I had sort of like tempered my expectations, not because I thought that there's some sort of, I don't know, like that Marvel can't possibly be good again, but because the trailers really did make it seem like this was going to be very down and dark and emotional, which is like not what I want from my space friends. I wanted the Guardians to have like to be fun and quippy and do all the stuff that they do in these movies, and they do that while they also have a lot of sort of emotional weight to it. And to answer your question, I weirdly, and we can get into this more, I'm actually weirdly now more excited for DC movies than I have been in maybe a dozen years. I guess I should say 11 years, because of the James Gunn factor. And I'm sort of like, oh, Marvel, why did this happen? I know why it happened, sadly, because I was too online for too long to be aware of the James Gunn shenanigans. But yeah, that's a whole thing that I'm sure we will get into. So I'm not like less excited about Marvel stuff now. I'm very happy to have had another movie that I really liked. I feel like, and we can also discuss and debate this, I'm feeling like I think the Guardians trilogy is my favorite trilogy of Marvel movies. So yeah, I did really like this.
You're not alone. A lot of people are saying that too. A lot of critics are sort of saying that, like, oh, this is sort of solidified. They landed the plane, and this is like when we look back on the MCU, that this is going to be sort of like much higher than maybe people would have initially expected just based on the first two movies. So yeah, I think I definitely hear you. I kind of want to run back our tape. I don't have it, so I can't. I run back our tape from when we talked about the Flash trailer and be like, see, I told you so, right? Like, because you were all like, it's just gonna be more of the same, Jen. It's gonna be more of the same. But yeah, I'm glad this is.
I will say James Gunn had nothing to do with the Flash, so I'm just going to put that out there. He's burdened with the Flash.
But he's in charge.
He is in charge now, and he loves it. He said the Flash is great.
Could I exactly? That's actually you took the words right out of my mouth, PT, because I've been on the fence about the whole Flash thing too, and then I started seeing these trailers, and so I started getting a little excited, and a little more excited, and then CinemaCon happened, and then all this hyperbole is exploding all around this movie, and then I'm like, what does James Gunn have to say about this? And knowing that he has to sell this DCU that he's coming up with, but at the same time knowing that he seems to be pretty genuine in his communication through his Twitter account of all things, and he comes out and says, yeah, I love this movie, this is a great movie. I'm like, okay, James Gunn, I do too.
But the other thing too is his credibility is on the line. So if he's like just sort of like saying that it's good when he doesn't really believe it, that's gonna he should be. I would like to think he's smart enough and savvy enough to know that that's going to come back to bite him.
Especially when he's getting ready to kick off this DCU. He doesn't want to start it on that note. So he is, in a sense, putting his neck out there, sticking his neck out. So, yes, I will revert back to I am so excited about The Flash.
I mean, yeah, I'll just say I don't recall James Gunn talking about how much he loves Shazam 2. Maybe he did in passing at one point, but it was, it's been a pretty constant thing that he's like, no, The Flash, even though I'm basically, not going ahead with all of this, this is still really good. So I want it. I want it to be good. I want to believe.
All right. My short take on Guardians Volume 3 is, I mean, I loved it. I thought it was great. It took me on, I knew I had to kind of brace myself emotionally, sort of like Colby was saying, just based on the trailer. And I actually still, I will kind of slightly disagree where like my heart went through the ringer with this movie. I was crying constantly. Like it was but in a good cathartic kind of nice way. And maybe that's sort of what we're referring to, without getting into spoilers. But I do think if I had one complaint or critique, it would be that they just tried to cram and this is a very common critique of a lot of Marvel films, that in the third act, when the action starts to ramp up and it gets kind of to the big finale, that they just tried to cram too much. There was too many things, too many pieces kind of moving, too many things going on. And, luckily for me, the sort of character arcs and the character beats were really grounded, all of it. So like, I think compared to other Marvel movies, but I'm here for Baby Rocket all day long.
Yes, I will just say, while we're still in the non-spoiler territory, I agree with that the sort of overstuffedness of it is the biggest negative, which in the grand scheme isn't that big of a negative. And it's partly the sort of act 3 of the movie problem, but I think it's also the sort of third movie in a trilogy when a bunch of the creatives are leaving, where they're like, okay, we got to do all of these things. And it had that feel of, oh, they probably had like 1.5 movies worth of stuff to do. But they were like, everyone's only signed for this movie, so we're doing all of this. I think that it worked, more than it didn't. But that was, there was some sort of tearing at the seams a little, from the overstuffedness.
I feel like this is a critique that comes up quite a bit, right? I mean, this is a more common critique, especially for genre films and comic book movies and stuff, that these overstuffed third acts. You guys brought up a really good point during your conversation about John Wick 4, that at one point I remembered, I was like pointing at my computer going, yes, I remember that, where they were planning a 4 and 5. And then all of a sudden 5 got, maybe it got consumed by the pandemic. I don't know why there's no 5. But then all of a sudden they're like, well, let's take these cool things from 5 and put it into 4. So I could see exactly what you're talking about with the third act of this movie, that if James Gunn was going to be around for another iteration of this, then he had things he wanted to do there, but that's not going to happen. So let's get them here now. But even apart from that, it just seems like these third acts of movies for these big genre films, it seems like this is coming up over and over again. And I wonder if people are going to start learning from that. If that's the big weakness, imagine, the reaction and the money you're going to make if you slam dunk your third act. And it's as simple as that.
I would agree. So, but we usually like to round out the spoiler-free section with what I call the recommendation algorithm, right? After we just like bagged on Netflix for 10 minutes. I'm now borrowing their terminology. Because this is a Marvel movie, and it's very clear who these movies are intended for, right? Fans of other Marvel movies, fans of comic book movies, genre films, whatever, right? But I guess within that subset, who are we recommending this movie to? Like, is it for all Marvel fans? Is a certain type of Marvel fan going to be happier with this movie than the other?
I mean, this is obvious, but certainly I would say the people who have liked the first 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, which maybe that seems pretty basic, but I think there may be some people who are either they've hit the wall on Marvel, they're sort of like, I'm out on this, or maybe the trailers made them think like, this is going to be a more serious, like, now that it's after Infinity War and Endgame, like they're going to do a more serious story. And to agree with what Jen said, there are many heart-wrenching and emotional things, but I will also note, like, I cried multiple times watching the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie when it came out, like in that, like, you know, in a big IMAX theater. So I've always found there's like an emotional core in these movies, which is why I like them so much. So yeah, I think that those people and the people who maybe are, I'm a little like gun shy, should certainly see it. And I think really anyone who is into big space fantasy, even if they are off on Marvel, you know, the connections to the larger Marvel world are very minor. So if, you know, they're like, I don't like superheroes, but, you know, I like, you know, space fantasy. I think that they should get on board.
Did you mean James Gunshy?
Oh no, I did not.
Sorry, I couldn't
No, I
help
did.
myself. That totally do that. I did not need to
I
say that
loved
at
it.
all, but I couldn't help it. Colby, what are your thoughts? Sort of like what? How does this fit into the fandom of Marvel?
I think it's the $1,000,000 question, and I'm not even sure Marvel knows. This is where I'm at a lot with Marvel movies, and you know, I don't read comic books. I really haven't over my life read comic books, and there's really one reason: I'm scared of them. I don't know where to start. There's this. I just look at this big, immense universe of, in some cases we're getting close to 100 years of storytelling, right? And I don't know what Spider-Man version of this is, and I don't know why is Captain America like that, and what happened, how come there's 16 Batmans, and this and that. I'm just scared of that, and I just wonder if at for the casual fan, the casual moviegoer that's out there, or maybe the youngster that maybe hasn't been a part of the Marvel universe, that is now like, oh, all my friends are going to see Guardians of the Galaxy, or maybe my cousins or something, but hasn't seen this. It's like the entry
Mm.
point. Where is it? Where's the entry point? But you know, that's what we have now. That's what we have after 15 years plus of storytelling with these movies. I'm pretty sure. So I almost wonder, like, is it now just a thing where Marvel fans are now going to see, of course, they're going to see the newest Marvel thing, and maybe they take a friend or two and can answer and fill in some blanks. I have family members that aren't as invested in this as I am, and I constantly, I'm like, wait a minute, you went to go see the newest, but you hadn't seen Endgame. You haven't seen any of the Disney Plus
You
stuff.
won't understand any
I'm
of
like, do
this.
you need help? I want to hug you and give you some help. Do you want me to answer some questions? So, you know, it's, I really don't know the answer. And when I saw this on our outline, this was the question I struggled the most with, and I found myself all of a sudden looking up worldwide box office totals, and I don't even know why. And I'm like, well, what I came
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that to
no,
you.
it's okay. It was actually quite fun and informative. What I came up with was, I think it goes back to what it always goes back to. What is the appeal? Is it a good story? Do we have compelling characters? Is it sort of becoming its own thing, like in the zeitgeist, right? And that's when you start bringing people in, and I guess that can be an entry point for some, if they haven't, you know, if they're not caught up, and then it can be a big celebration for us invested people. But I just think that this movie has that, right? It has the good characters, it has the good story, it has the appealing soundtrack. So I think that it could be marketed and appealing to a wide variety of people. I think I just talked for like 4 minutes and didn't say anything, but that's why you have me on.
I think you were saying good things in there, and I agree, because I think that's the one thing that I didn't think to say in the short take, even though it was in sort of my notes about it, is that a person who may like this is also just someone who likes smart storytelling. I think a lot of really smart choices are made in this about, you know, we've been saying, oh, there's, you know, there's character beats, there's character moments, there's arcs, the story makes, you know, it's all underpinning it, and them that merely existing is already like clearing a bar, for better or for worse. But I think that like there's really smart choices, like it's not just
Yeah.
like that there are choices, but I think it's done really well. And so I think that there may be people who are, you know, not necessarily into the trappings of sci-fi or of fantasy or of Marvel, who could just enjoy this. And I think, you know, not to give away a future topic. You might be able to just jump in now if you just want to go see a movie in the theater. It obviously makes more sense if you've seen the other movies, but I think that just within this narrative, you get enough information of where everyone is to start for the payoffs to work for you.
Yeah, and so the question in our outline that PT is referring to is, what kind of homework do people need to do before they see this movie? I agree that I think the ideal situation is you watched the first two Guardians movies and then this one. I do think there's enough references to the holiday special though that like if you have time to add that in, I feel like that would be really helpful just because like and part of that is because of the production circumstances. Like they shot the holiday special while they were filming this movie. So like visually everything is very like there's a continuity there, but then also just like where all the characters are at, I feel like is very like the holiday special on Disney Plus is closer to this movie than the other two.
Yes.
In terms of like where the characters are and where the story is and stuff like that. So I feel like from that point alone, like that it would just enrich your viewing of it. But yeah, what does anyone else have any thoughts about that of like what are you recommending? But I do agree that like someone who has not really been that in on Marvel or has not seen everything, you could just sort of pick the Guardians thread of the MCU and just point them there, and I think they would have a great time.
I agree with you, Jen, about the holiday special. I was pleasantly surprised at how informed this movie was by it, and I think it's the first film, and I mean maybe parts of Doctor Strange, but it's the first film that has been that informed by a Disney Plus presentation. And I'm referring to Doctor Strange because of that one scene with Wanda that was a post-credit scene from WandaVision, because they pretty much entirely threw the rest of the series out with her portrayal in that movie. But I've been waiting and waiting.
Don't get me
I
started.
know. I've been waiting and waiting since Netflix Daredevil for and what's the TV show with Coulson, Agents of Shield, waiting for things to pop up in the movies that we first saw on TV shows, and really in a meaningful way. This is the first one, so I'm super excited about that. The only other thing that I would bring up about recommending for another person to watch if they haven't seen anything is this wonderful little thing that Marvel does on Disney Plus called Marvel Legends, which is sort of like a highlight reel for every character that's about to come out in a movie or maybe even a Disney Plus show. And I really wish Star Wars had a version of this because I would watch it all day long. I just want to see, cool little profiles on Star Wars characters. I just keep it on a loop. But I think it's such a
You just have it in the background.
it's a smart thing to do because it does give you the characters you need, and it gives you a thorough understanding. What are they called? Cliff's Notes style of what you need to know going into this upcoming movie. So Lucasfilm, if you're listening, which I know at some point you will be if not already, make something like that for Star Wars.
Seconded.
I love your delusions of grandeur. That's amazing. Yeah, I agree because I think with Star Wars, and again, this has high risk with the three of us to be derailed into a Star Wars conversation. But with Star Wars, that they do those curated episode batches, right? Where they're like, here are all the Ahsoka episodes. Here's the Mandalore arcs from the Clone Wars, right? But yeah, I feel like that has kind of a barrier to entry because that's just a lot of time. And so what's nice about the little Marvel Legends things is it's like the length of a YouTube video. Basically, you can just kind of get in and get out, get what you need. I find those helpful just as someone who's seen everything, but maybe it's been a minute since I've seen some of the things because I'll be like, oh right, that's right. The like, Black Widow did interrogate Loki in that movie. Like things that I totally forgot about. So yeah, I would second that as well.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add, and this is maybe obvious to the people who watch the MCU more generally, but the Guardians of the Galaxy characters do appear in scenes in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. I believe, if I've heard correctly, those scenes are also written, I don't know about directed, but written by James Gunn. So it's kept in their voice. It's sort of his take still on what's happening. those movies are pretty good. So if you were thinking of maybe, you know, getting involved, even if it's just to follow the thread of what happens, I would have to assume some fan has made a supercut online of just Guardian stuff. But you know, it is an extra like 6 hours, 5.5, 6 hours of movie watching, so it's not required. I do think that there's, you know, discussion between the holiday special, which I concur with everything you're both saying about that being, you know, certainly on the list. But between the holiday special and this movie, they do sort of talk through and sort of have little exposition moments of what happened. But it's pretty wild, the jump between Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which, even though it came out a few years later, is set like only a couple months after the first movie, and then almost a decade will have gone by, maybe more. I think maybe it was more than a decade in universe between Volume 2 and Volume 3. So actually experiencing some of that might be worthwhile if there are people who somehow haven't seen Avengers but maybe would because they want homework for Volume 3. Then that's certainly something to put on the table.
All right. I think that was sufficiently helpful and cryptic. So I think we'll shift over to spoiler mode now. So if you have not seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I know we talked a lot about, we mentioned a lot of different things just now, but if you have not seen Volume 3 specifically, we are about to go into full spoiler mode with it and talk about all the things that happened in it, including some very surprising things. And so, you know, if that's not what you're interested in, if you're not ready for that at this point, I'm going to count down from 3, and then whatever happens after that is on you. So 3, 2, 1. Now we're in spoiler mode. And sort of similar to our John Wick conversation, I realize I guess I like going for the jugular with the spoilers when you go into spoiler mode, because on our list I have us starting with what we, I think, we all three of us danced around in the spoiler free section of the trailer. Made it look like there were gonna be some deaths and some casualties because this was the last movie, and there weren't. They all survived. So how did that land for you? I mean, how surprised by that were you? Do you think that works in terms of the story, in terms of where they're leaving this thread of the MCU?
I was so pleasantly surprised. I have to tell you, I didn't need to see any of these people die. After after Endgame and all the heaviness of the post Endgame Phase 4 that we managed our way through, I was happy that Ant-Man and and the Wasp: Quantumania was more lighthearted than I thought it was going to be. That was another movie that they sort of started building up as being this heavy, and it did have its heavy moments, but it wasn't as heavy as I thought it was going to be. Same with this. I don't think you have to kill characters. I think it's actually a cheap way to draw out people's emotions, and I think it's way more creative when you're able to find an ending or maybe a transition for a character when it doesn't involve their death. It's more creative because, hey, look, in real life, we have people that come and go in our lives all the time, and death is not the reason why, right? Somebody moves away, somebody gets a new job, sadly, a relationship ends or something like that. So when you're able to pick and choose those good reasons and still have the poignancy of people saying goodbye to each other, but it doesn't have to go to the easy get out of jail free card death, I give James Gunn tons of credit for that, because I thought that everywhere these characters ended up makes a lot of sense for each one of them. And it was emotional and it was poignant and it was wonderful, and you didn't have to kill anybody. And I was so happy about it.
No one had to die.
No one had to die.
Except for that whole planet of people who got
good point.
But no, I fully agree, and I think I wasn't even like, I wasn't mad at the thought that, like, oh, they're gonna, some of these characters won't make it. But that, I think, really wasn't the only thing I was referring to when I said the sort of good choices of how they did it. But I think that it was getting to some of that more nuanced, harder things of, the group breaks up at the end, but not because of people die and not because of animosity or hatred or civil war or anything like that. It's just sort of like, the time for this is done. We all have to go off and do our own things because we need to do the things that we need to do for reasons that have, make total sense and click in place because of the events of what happened in this movie, and to a degree, the previous movies as well. So I thought that was great. The only like drawback thing I would say is because of that, I would say I don't know if I like that they had like multiple fake out moments of just sort of like, and this is the moment when Drax is going to die. Just kidding. He's fine. This is the moment when Rocket goes to heaven. Just kidding. He's fine. This is the moment that Star-Lord blows up in space and is all like, whatever. No, whatever. No, Warlock saved him. He's fine. And so, I get it, and, play with expectations, the tension of it. I don't know how that all will feel on rewatches, but with the sort of, and I respect Colby's desire to stay away from any like behind the scenes stuff or like not get too deep into the weeds on this. But, the general knowledge, to me, or at least knowledge that I had going into it, as someone who has not been doggedly following the MCU or the production, is James Gunn's not going to be back. He's going to another company. Chris Pratt has a bunch of other things going on, like is probably not going to want to keep doing this. His contract is up. Multiple actors, Zoe Saldana and Dave Bautista, have said, this is it for me and the character. So it's sort of just like, okay, like you went in being like, these people are done. Like and then the marketing did make it seem like, oh, these characters are done. So, I see how the fake outs work in that context. I wonder how they'll look 3 years from now when all that's in the past and you're just watching the movie and it's like, maybe we didn't need to spend 3 minutes of Drax being shot in the back when like he's just going to walk away and be fine. But yeah, I'm happy they all lived, and I really like the story choices around them.
Yeah, for me, it depended on which character had the fake out, because I think they kind of landed differently for me. So Rocket, I think, was brilliantly done, because by having the sort of like, heaven mind palace sort of situation, that signals to me, just based on kind of like other movies I've seen and sort of the visual, like to quote PT, the visual language of cinema, like it's like he's in that kind of purgatory, like at the gates, but and it could go either way. So like I think I was sort of like, oh, I am kind of in suspense about how this is going to go, but I know that there are options, right? Like I know this could very easily be the not yet, which is what we got, right? And or he could cross over or whatever. Whereas with Star-Lord's thing, I feel like it was too much a means to an end of a joke, that I thought it really kind of undermined the tone, like just the like it's like, you can't, to me, I was like, you can't have it both ways. You can't like make us actually think that he died, because that, for a split second, they were like, oh, he's frozen, oh, he's done, right? Like that's it. But then it keeps going and his face gets all contorted and bloated, and then it seems like that they only did all of that just so he could be like, didn't that look cool? And she's like, yeah, sure. And I was like, well, just tonally, those two things don't match. And like, we can't really, I couldn't really handle both of those in quick succession. So yeah, it really kind of just depended. I was like, really? Yeah, that was the one where I was like, okay, fine. Like, I guess you're having your fun, whatever. But yeah, I would agree that in general, I did not resent that no one died, because I feel like there are some situations where I'm like, this is going to, if you take back this death or fake us out, it will lessen the impact of the emotional impact of the moment where we thought that they were dying. And it almost is like a cheap move to be like, just kidding. But I feel like for some reason I didn't feel that way for the most part with this movie, where I was like, because it brought us to the brink, the emotional brink, and then kind of walked us back to a more hopeful place. So maybe that's why I didn't mind.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't think it's like, this is a disaster, or like it's some sort of fatal flaw. It was more just sort of like it in a movie that I think worked, I don't know, 96% of the way. Like part of that 4% was just like, it's already really long. There's already a lot going on. Did we need those? I mean, there is a defense maybe of the Star-Lord moment where it's also sort of an Adam Warlock character moment of he's learning to help these people. Like he has seen them help others, and so he's like, I will help as well. But yeah, I don't know if it was worth the sort of buildup that it got. Again, minor nitpick.
But it's an honest nitpick, and I'm there with you too because I can tell you I rolled my eyes at that, at the whole. I don't know. It's just like sort of did James Gunn do this just because of the phrase that's out there, fat Pratt? Have you guys have heard the fat Pratt from his old
Mm-hmm.
comedy days? Like, why? That's too much. Like, first of all, I was like, "You're going back for the Zune, buddy? You haven't uploaded that stuff to
Yes.
some database somewhere? Like, it's a digital musical player, and And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, it just kept going and going. I'm like, this is how you're gonna kill Star Lord? This what this is, so it wasn't believable to me for any point of that scene, and then I just thought it got to be a little too silly. But that's what you get. You can cross into that territory with James Gunn, right? Because that's him walking the line of his humor, similar to Taika Waititi and the whole Thor Love and Thunder thing. You can go up to that point and up to that point, and then they're like, no, we're gonna keep going. Some people eat it up and love it. Other people are just like, okay, that was a little too much. I agree with both of you on that scene specifically. Yeah, um, I was like, okay, but I'm the type of person that looks, and I have a very short memory to quote Ted Lasso. I'm a goldfish, and in that sense of things. So if I see something that I don't really like in a movie, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty easy to please. I'm just gonna keep moving.
And there was plenty of great stuff right after that. So I think, yeah, like I think that would have been an easy thing to just forget about. The extra thing that confused me as well, because I think going into this, I really expected Chris Pratt to have a hard out, because I feel like just the morning of the day that I saw the movie, there was a news article where he was like, it said like Chris Pratt will return as Star Lord if, it was very conditional, if the right script comes along or if the right story comes along. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is just him being like, no, really, I'm done. And then the Star Lord will return
Mm-hmm.
thing at the end in the post credit scene. I was like, huh? Like when I thought, huh? Okay, does that mean that was a lie when I read that this morning? Right? Or that he's saying if, but then really they had already found out something, or like he's just trying to keep his options open. So I just thought that was a really strange choice. And in terms of post credit scene, earlier I mentioned that the nice thing about this movie actually was kind of like it was unburdened by the larger MCU and kind of like where the MCU is going. Like I didn't really agonize over or speculate over that too much while I was watching this. I just enjoyed it. But then when it got to Star-Lord Will Return, I was like, why? Like, why is this the thing that we're ending on and not something that seems more directly to be feeding into whatever's happening next? So yeah, what did you two make of the Star-Lord Will Return move?
Well, I took it to be Chris Pratt has a smart financial sense to know that let's keep those paychecks coming if and when the time comes, and he does not want to close any doors in case they get someone else to voice Mario. And they don't make any more dinosaurs in Jurassic World. He's like, I'll still have something to line the pockets. But I mean, I think that is part of playing off the sort, again, the knowledge, maybe the meta knowledge of like, we sort of end with a new group of guardians that has formed, and those exist, and the other characters, like we've gone off and done other things, that he as the star and as the person who maybe has become the most famous out of these movies, you might expect it to be, we're shutting it down. So it could be that. I also sort of took it as, that last credit scene is, I don't know why people are listening if they haven't seen it, but in case they saw the movie but then left before the end of the credits, it's just him and his grandfather sitting at a small kitchen table, sort of gossiping about like someone in their neighborhood, and he's like, I want to hear like that gossip, and the dad's like, and they're like just he's looking at a newspaper. Grandfather's looking at a newspaper, and to me, like, I think there's a way, the out, if they never do bring the character back, he's never back on screen, the out of explaining that is he's fully committed. The character is fully committed to being Peter Quill now. He is a human being on Earth living with his grandfather. He is not the intergalactic space hero traveler, but like, he's not like, that's not the end of his life. That's not the end of his road. He's not going to stay there forever. when he's had his time with his grandfather, when he's done the sort of growing and learning. He's talked about, learn to swim, and not just jump from lily pad to lily pad, as they say in the movie. He's getting back in the game and he'll be out there. Maybe we won't see that. Maybe that's not going to be Chris Pratt's face on a big screen, shooting his two guns, in a Marvel movie. But he is going to do that in the future. And so it's that promise, that without necessarily being a James Bond will return pledge of we're definitely seeing another movie with him.
What you just said made me think maybe this is more opening the door for recasting an old man Peter, which depending on how much time passes could still be Chris Pratt if he's way old, I mean, how depending on how long they wait, he could be of the correct age. But I feel like if they did something sooner with what you're describing of he's retired Star-Lord, someone shows up at his doorstep and then he gets kind of pulled back in when he's and basically saying the Danny Glover from Lethal Weapon catchphrase. That actually sounds like a pretty fun movie to me.
You've cracked it. They faked us out with the announcement that Harrison Ford is taking over Thunderbolt Ross. He's old Star-Lord. He's multiverse old Star-Lord coming in 2025.
Make that happen. No, that was cracked here on the Long Take podcast. You heard it.
Plant
here
the flag.
We're giving these ideas for free, apparently.
Yeah.
just put them out there. Colby, what do you think about this? Do you think Star-Lord? It is Star-Lord will return, not Star-Lord could return at a later date.
First, I was surprised it didn't say the Guardians of the Galaxy, because clearly at the end of the movie there's still a Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's a pretty cool roster, and it's a roster of characters I would like to see more of. So I was sort of surprised that they didn't do that. Was surprised that they just singled out Star-Lord. There's the real world side of me, and then the in story side of me. The real world doesn't believe anything actors say in any interview ever, because Daisy Ridley is going to be Rey Skywalker again. Matt Damon played Jason Bourne again. Michael Keaton is going to be Batman again. You've got these, if the circumstances and everything lines up properly, and the truck with their money is big enough when it rolls up to their house, they're going to play these characters. So Peter Quill, I mean, Chris Pratt, no matter what the print says, it would be very smart. I mean, another one, Chris Evans, even off of the beach a little bit, saying, hey, if there's more stories for Captain America, he's not dead, right? So smart planning. And I think for Chris Pratt, and also story-wise, now skipping over into that side of my brain, I'm always in favor of keeping characters around and putting them in places where you can pull them off the bench for some reason. Because if you kill them, you have to do one of two things: stop telling stories about them, or, like you said, Jen, previously, you have to figure out a way to bring them back out of their death, which then cheapens the death for whatever reason that was. I don't want to see Robert Downey Jr. play Iron Man again, because that was, I mean, can you find a better ending to his arc for Tony Stark? I mean, you can't. So the fact that they put him where he is, and do I think for 1 second that Peter Quill is going to be happy being old Pete down the street? No, that Star-Lord's still in there, and he's going to want to get a little bit of some galaxy hopping at some point, and there'll be a good reason for it. When that'll be, who knows? And I'm here for it. I just think it's a smart storytelling decision to keep him around and then sort of put that tag. But I was a bit surprised that it was him specifically.
It also feels to some degree, and I don't want to say that this is an intentional jabbing at the audience, but there's so much sort of especially attention paid to those post-credit scenes where it's like reading the tea leaves and trying to piece together the puzzle of okay, what does this mean? What's coming next? What are we seeing about the future? Which sometimes bleeds over into people watching these not just the MCU, but franchise movies in general as a sort of if they're just updating the Wikipedia entries in their brain of just this is what happened to this character, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. Great, what's next? And it's just that type of media consumption, and so it's almost like you're poking those people to be just sort of like, yeah, this character will return. You don't know when, you don't know where, like you don't have the pieces to that puzzle. Like, you thought this guy was off the board. You thought the tease was that there's going to be the new Guardians. Guess what? It's not. Figure it out or don't deal with it. Like, I'm James Gunn. Goodbye. And like, he's off on in another continuum. So, I think there may be some degree of play there as well.
The way you described it just made it seem like so much more of a jerk move than I originally thought.
It is James Gunn and Chris Pratt. Like, they're sharp. They've got edge to them.
Yeah.
My question is, does Kevin Feige know that was going to be there, or was that James Gunn being like, I'm gonna troll all of you guys, and then Kevin Feige screened it and he's just like, wait, but what? What do you? And there goes Gunn, like, okay, I'm gonna go cast Crypto the Superdog now. Bye, guys.
Oh yeah, I think, and in general, I'd say that the tone. And I'm not the first person to say this, I'm pretty sure, but like the tone of this movie compared to the other two does seem like it's like dialing up the James Gunn-ness in terms of like how irreverent and kind of how mature, how violent. I feel like it's just like, it feels to me like how someone acts when they know this is their last day on the job, right? Where they're like, they're not quite burning bridges, but they're also kind of like having a little fun and letting loose a little.
Yeah. Oh, but beyond that, there is also, we sort of hinted at it like earlier, there was for people who may not know, who are blissfully unaware of the ongoing churning of online life. There was part of the reason why this is coming out 5 years after Endgame is that at one point James Gunn was fired. He was fired from this movie, or at least taken off of it. And people went who were of a particular political bent, who had particular sort of thoughts in their mind about James Gunn's stances online, and they dug up old tweets that he had done making crass jokes about inappropriate things, and they were just like, "Look, this guy's a monster. Like, you can't have him." And Marvel was like, okay, we're taking him off. And everyone in the cast, I'll do credit to it sounds like it was organized by Chris Pratt, who also hasn't had the best reputational few years. But Chris Pratt and everyone in the cast was just like, we're not going to do this unless it's James Gunn. And Marvel kind of had to come back to him with their tail between their legs after he had gone and agreed to signed on with DC to do what became the Suicide Squad, and then the Peacemaker offshoot show on HBO or HBO Max, or the Max or Max, whatever it's called. And they were like, okay, like please come back. So it's last day on the job, but also we've already proven that you can't do this without me. Like the other people who need to do, who are required, won't do it without me. So like, what are you going to do? Stop me from having like a space station made of flesh? Like, are you gonna get in the way of that? No. Okay, great. Everyone communicates putting their hand in something that looks like urine. Guess what? That's happening. That's happening in my movie. And it's just like, okay, James, whatever you say. So yeah, if it was sort of a twist that Star-Lord will return, then again, it's like, what's Kevin Feige going to say? It's just sort of like, oh, okay, James, that's fine. I guess we'll put that into. James is like, great, see you later. Gotta go. Going down the street.
I want to shift to talking about Rocket, because I think the counterpoint to Star-Lord will return, because that's a very Star-Lord centric. That makes the movie seem more Star-Lord centric than it actually is, I think. And like, I think Rocket is very clearly the main character. Lila literally says, this was your story all along, you just didn't know it. And I feel like, to me, that screamed meta commentary, where that's James Gunn talking to us, being like, you thought this was about Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. That was cute. All along, my heart belongs to Rocket, and this is my time to let him shine. Which Rocket Raccoon has always been my favorite Guardian, and so what were your thoughts on? Were you surprised with how center stage Rocket was? I have a couple of just Rocket related questions. So you can jump around to any of them that are in here, but like, how did you feel about the flashbacks? I kept going back and forth to being like, is this an origin story? Is this a backstory? is this a passing of the mantle, right? Because we end the movie with Rocket being in charge of the Guardians. So like give me your thoughts on Rocket and his role in all this.
I agree with you about Rocket. He's been my favorite Guardian. Well, maybe Groot. I think Groot. It's a tie because they're sort of tied together anyway. I love their dynamic from the very start and all the way through this movie. Um, it's another pleasant surprise that this is such a Rocket centric movie because of that reason. I just enjoy, Bradley Cooper just kills it with his voice. Some of my favorite scenes in Infinity War involve Rocket. He's there, and even in Endgame too. Like that scene where he's sitting on the stairs of the spaceship with Nebula, and he's just sort of like he just puts his hand on her hand. Um, the story arc for him has been amazing, and I'm so glad that he was at the heart of this movie. James Gunn tweeted, I think the day that it came out, so I did not read it that day. I went back and did a lot of tweet reading on Sunday after I saw it, but he talked about how Rocket's story is his story. So really not too much of a surprise that he had such a big part of Gunn's farewell to the MCU, right? Um, I will say though that the origin story, the flashbacks, so hard to watch. That was so hard to watch, and you brought it up, Jen, about the violence, the the animal stuff, the violence, which a lot of times I noticed. See, it seemed that they were not shooting like blaster type of guns, but actual gun type of guns, right? They acted like guns, and I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm used to seeing space people shoot blaster red or green bolts, and they go pew pew pew. No, these were going bang bang bang, right? And it was pretty violent. So, that's not really a rocket centric thing, but going back to the animal treatment and even just the way that, you know, the grotesque imagery that we saw in that, it didn't take me out of it. I understand that that's part of it, but I can imagine that there were lots and lots of people out there that could have been very triggered by a lot of those images. Um, and then go forward in the story where they killed his friends. They
Mm-hmm.
they killed his friends, and I'm sitting there in the theater going, okay, you're making a lot of sense to me now, Rocket. A lot what we saw in Volume 1, what we see in Volume 2, that hard outer shell through Endgame and through Infinity War. Okay, this is filling in a lot of blanks for you, buddy. And I just wanted to like go up onto the screen and hug him. So when he got that hug from Star Lord and from Groot was just such a wonderful image to see because that's what I wanted to do for him. But yeah, he is the heart. If you go back, I want to go back now and rewatch these characters through these stories that they've told us, looking through the lenses now that we have after this movie, and just sort of pick up on things that James Gunn probably hid for us that didn't make any sense until now. And that's this brilliant storytelling, right? And I also want to go back and watch this movie through the lens that PT you just described, with James Gunn sort of flipping the bird to everybody as he's making this movie, because there's he's like, oh, I'm going to drop the first F-bomb in MCU. Not you, Deadpool. No. It's not going to be you, Deadpool. It's not going to be you, Wolverine. It's going to be Peter Quill of all people.
And talking about a car door of all things.
About a car door. Yeah, ridiculous. But
The most banal possible thing they could be discussing. Yes.
very, very good placement of their one F-bomb in a PG-13 movie, right? They get one. So, yeah, Rocket, this was, I wanted it to say Rocket Raccoon will return at the end. That's what I wanted it to say. And nothing against Star-Lord. He's great. I love him. But I want more Rocket. Give me more Rocket.
I agree with both of you that Rocket's the best. I do sometimes I'm like, maybe it's Groot, but it's like it's Rocket, and because Groot exists in his best way with Rocket there, so like I kind of feel like this sort of played out, I guess, with some of Endgame, where it's like, yeah, if you have Rocket on his own, it's still really good. But I sort of feel like that first post-credit scene where he is now the leader of the new Guardians was an implicit promise that Rocket will return. That when, if nothing else, when they get to what's the next Avengers movie, Secret Wars, is that the one that's supposed to come down the road? I forget the name of it, but you know, there's
The Kang Dynasty. There's going to be one before an Avengers film before Secret Wars. It's the Kang Dynasty.
well, maybe depending how they feel about Kang. A little TBD. Yes, the answer to that is also might be the answer to when Loki season 2 comes out. But like I just am fully assuming those characters, whatever 5-6 characters. I think if we include the little Loth cat, which I know that's not what it is, but I was kept thinking that's a Loth cat.
It really did look like it.
You know that it will be back. So Rocket will return when we are back in the cosmos, when the rest of the MCU connects with it. In terms of,
thank you, PT, because that made me feel much
yeah,
better that I didn't get my title card there. That I feel better now.
Yeah, I mean, it's he's the captain. Now he's the captain. You gotta defer to him.
True.
But yeah, in terms of the sort of flashback scenes, the Rocket in his youth, I'll go with it. I'll say this first, is that the first one of those, when they first are like, he's in the cage and he's hurt and he starts talking to the other people, I was obviously like a wreck. Like, I'm devastated by what is happening and the things that I'm seeing. But that was also the only time in the movie where I was just sort of like, I don't like what you're doing, and I can't believe you're doing this to me. Like, it felt manipulative in that moment. I think the story evolved so well that I didn't feel that way by the end. But like, and maybe that was,
but you resented it
at first. You know, it was that sort of, this is my thinking on it is always, I always go to the movie The Notebook, which I know is beloved by many people, but like, that's a movie I've only seen it a couple times. When I watch it, I'm crying at the end, but I'm also like, I don't like you. I don't respect you for what you've done to me here. Like, you did it, and like you got the result, but I don't respect you. And so I was like, they're going to make these animals real sad, and they're going to be tortured, and they're going to make me sad, and I can't respect you for pulling my heartstrings like that. It's so cheap. But it's not. It's more than that, and they evolve it, and it's so good, and it still got me like so hard. And I think that all of that pays off, both in terms of what Colby was saying of how we see Rocket's character through, you know, leading up to this movie, and like the sort of how like it explains so much, but it also is why I was in the moment like, yeah, Rocket's gonna die. Like, he is gonna go. He's gonna join his friends. It's the only way, like, all of that was to be like, yeah, I can be happy that this character I love is gonna die because he gets to go spend time with his friends again. So like, that was when like I had let him go. I was like, okay, until then there was the moment of like, you know, but not now, or not yet. And then I was like, let's go. He's coming back. So though, then I was able to get pumped. And you know, so I think, oh, go ahead.
It was very Gladiator, that moment.
Yes. Yeah, there's also there's some degree of like the professional wrestling where it's like the hand flops down once, the hand flops down twice, the third time it's like, no, it's still strength and he's ready to go. But yeah, I think that, you know, it needed to be that, like, it needed to pack that, but it didn't need to. But I feel like it benefits the movie that it packs that punch, that it is so visceral and it's so painful, to both sort of see what's happened to these animals and also like fall in love with each of them as these like innocent creatures, and then see what happens to them, because it also reinforces this bad guy who's maybe one of the best bad guys that we've had in Marvel, for like, I think lots of different reasons, but one of them is just sort of like, you know, it is kind of a shortcut, but it's just sort of like, what a jerk, like, just what a terrible absolute monster. And it's just sort of like, yeah, and then if you described it of like, and then at one point in the flashbacks we see that his full face gets clawed off, and at the end of the movie you see what that looks like, when they peel his fake nice face away. And when you see this terrible injuries he's experienced, all you think is good. Like, it's like, yes, I'm so glad this happened to you.
The design of that was so clever, because the whole movie I was sort of thinking about, there's got to be something going on with these like seams, like the wrinkles on the side of his face, like, and then I think it actually did dawn on me before we got to that part of the flashbacks, and it clicked, and I was like, oh no, they're gonna do that, and then they did. So you know, I felt very vindicated with that. There's so many. I feel like as you're talking, I had so many different thoughts to respond to, but I think the one line that unlocks, because you're spending a lot of time talking about the flashbacks in the story of Rocket and his friends, and how they're really being abused and exploited. For me, the line that really unlocks it is actually at the end when Rocket says to the High Evolutionary, "It's not that you wanted to make things better; it's that you weren't happy with the way things were. Like you weren't okay with how people were, right? Like basically, it become
Yeah.
to me there was this huge subtext for their relationship of acceptance, right? That he was like Rocket as he was as a raccoon was not like he didn't accept him that way, and so he with all these creatures, right? So then he has to kind of like get in there and interfere and try to quote unquote make them better, but really he's just sort of like, you know, twisting and morphing kind of who they actually are. And so for me that was really what unlocked the like justified why we had to go through all of that and see all of the friends and you know, justice for Floor, right? Like he just I think he was the toughest one for me because I feel like his cybernetics were probably the most grotesque um out of all of them. But yeah, to me that was the thing that kind of made it not okay from like I wasn't okay, but made it from a storytelling perspective okay for them to have manipulated us in that way.
Yeah, I agree. The other line I want to point out, from sort of not flashback, but the present of the movie, which I think also speaks to the like this was always your story, is when he has like the High Evolutionaries down on the ground, and it's just sort of like I forget who else is just sort of like, oh, you're not going to like shoot him in the head, which is just like shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head. Like I was ready to do it, and he's just like no, because I'm a guardian of the galaxy. Like, it's like, that's not the rules. And we follow some rules and that's it. But it's like, that is also kind of like, this is what all these people have been doing is like, not only finding each other and through their sort of connections and found family, finding themselves, but also sort of committing to doing something beyond whatever might be what they immediately want. And it's like, they have this sort of higher purpose. And so he has to adhere to that, even though it's obviously not what he wants to do in his heart. But he's like, I gotta let this guy live temporarily. Then he blows up, like, I think like, a few minutes later. But he doesn't kill him with his own hands. It's the, eventual explosion of the ship kills him.
You can juxtapose that against the scene in Infinity War where right in the beginning when they find Thor, right before he smashes into their windshield, they're flying, right? And somebody asks, and I'm sorry, I'll butcher the scene, but somebody asks, like, what are we gonna do here? Oh, we're gonna help so and so. And Rocket's like, and then we're gonna take their ship. And he's like, no, we're not gonna take their ship, we're just gonna help them. And then he just sort of looks at me, he's just like Star-Lord just sort of gives him the nod, right? So, okay, Rocket's on board. We're going to help these people, but we're going to take something from them. And here he is. He has a chance to dole out the ultimate revenge. And it's a very, very much a different decision he makes.
Yeah, I think that the brilliant thing about this film is that we can trace that trajectory for each and every Guardian, right? Where it's like Drax was, when we meet him originally, right? He's in kill mode, right? Like he's like about to throttle every person he meets because he has so much pain from losing his wife and his daughter. And so then to see how far he's come, where he then finds peace by like, bonding with all of these children who need well, I don't know if I'd call him a father figure. He's probably more like a cool uncle figure to them. But like, like it really is beautiful. And the same thing with Nebula, right? Like to think about how the way she is, and they talk about this in the film, right? Where she is more like Gamora 2.0 in this movie. She was that way when we first met her, but that she now is so caring and looks out for everybody. Almost like at the beginning of the movie, they sort of position her as like the responsible one, right? Like they're like, well, what are you going to do about Peter drinking too much? And she's like, why is it my responsibility? Yeah. And I feel like every single character has that very, very clear arc. And if we go back to Rocket, like this movie doesn't work if those seeds have not been planted in volume 1 and 2, right? Like if we don't have the references of Rocket cryptically being like, you don't know what I've been through, like, and referencing obtusely what has happened to him, but we don't actually get the full story until now. I feel like that's what really makes it work, because it brings me back to kind of like all the moments that we've had with the character, and then it becomes this like climactic moment when we finally get the backstory. And the Guardians are kind of right there with us, right? Like, I really like that, where their reaction of like, we had no idea until they're watching his file. I thought that was a really great moment, because that's sort of what we're going through as the audience, but they're also sort of like, they didn't know how deep his trauma went.
Well, and his absolute denial for 3 movies plus some more that I am not a raccoon. I am not a raccoon. I am not a raccoon. And then he comes back from his heavenly halfway house with Lila and he's like, I'm a raccoon. I mean, and I think, that's at the heart of the movie, is that you find who you are and you find a way to love that, and then you're going to thrive because of that, right? And that was a beautiful way of illustrating it. And again, that goes back to the very first movie, right? He's always had those issues about what he is. Well, now he's to the point where he has accepted what he is. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And we see all that forming in the flashbacks, right? The High Evolutionary is the one who instilled that sense of self-loathing, that he's an abomination, that he's a monster, right? And he's carried that with him through the entire trilogy. And so now for him to kind of really confront that and to be like, no, I am both Rocket Raccoon, but I also reject that you made me this way, right? Like it's like he accepts himself for who he is and all of his flaws, and they all do. And that's like that's what the unique magic of Guardians of the Galaxy is, that they're all hot messes. And yet they, like, the work of the films is for them to kind of learn to accept each other as hot messes, and to like embrace their different strengths and weaknesses and all that.
And what's also fascinating about the choices made here, especially in the end, in the wrap up, when Colby said it earlier, how there's how good and strong the ending is that each of them take steps, however big they may be, or some are bigger than others, I guess I should say, to accepting themselves more, and they only got to do that because of their group, because of them being together. But at the end, that also is why the group breaks up. And again, it's not because of animosity, and it's not because of any sort of negativity. And there's some degree of like, oh, like, we're not going to see each other. It's like, but we, that doesn't mean we don't care about each other. It doesn't mean, that it doesn't mean that you need to walk back any of that personal growth and acceptance that you've achieved, or that you're going to go and work on. But that does also mean sometimes the end of things. And I think that was very sophisticated and mature emotionally for a goofy space comic book movie.
All right, so we've gone too long without talking about the music in this movie, I think. Do you have favorite needle drops? Do you have any thoughts about how the type of music in this movie is sort of shifting a little bit? Or not a little bit, actually a lot from the previous two, mostly chronologically. But yeah, what did you think about the proprietary or signature James Gunn soundtrack?
The beginning and the end for me. The beginning with that acoustic version of Creep from Radiohead, I thought is so perfect. Not only establishing the tone, but also you're inside Rocket's head from the beginning. He's the one that chose that track, right? Because he puts that on the little Zune thing, and he's putting it through the speakers. Or I think maybe at that point he's just listening to it. But I'm a sucker for any acoustic version of a song, right? So this was such a great one. And the way to start out the film really showed us where Rocket was before Adam Warlock showed up. And I hate to say it, but like, if you want a really good self-loathing song, listen to Creep by Radiohead, right? Because that's going to get you where it counts. And that's where he's at. He's there. And then by the end of the movie, on Nowhere, he's also the one that chooses the track before everybody goes their separate ways. And it's The Dog Days Are Over by Florence and the Machine. And I wanted to jump up and start dancing in the audience with the characters on the screen, because the pure joy of that scene was just, I felt like I got the most emotional during that scene. That elicited such joy at the end. And then they ended off with Drax, who we all know is not a dancer, doesn't want anything to do with dancing, and will stop people from dancing. And even he gets over that and just starts doing whatever he wanted to call was dancing. Boy, it was just a beautiful culmination. And then I believe I think it was the last musical choice that I'll bring up is during the post-credit scene when Rocket puts it back to the beginning and he plays Hooked on was it
Come and Get Your Love.
I can't even remember the name of it. Yeah. To have it, he's now in his new iteration of the galaxy, the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he's bringing that heritage, if you will, with him and bringing it to the new group. Just, man, James Gunn, one of you said it before, and I'll just echo it. Bring on the DCU, because I'm more excited now about the DCU after seeing this movie than I was before. So,
yeah, I mean, he's really a master of it in a way. It's like, I mean, obviously very different vibes than Tarantino, but that same sort of just like mixtape master and able to sort of tap into how these songs will make people feel, while also the managing the tale of now across 3 movies, and to some degree the offshoots too, but really the 3 main movies, that like these songs are here and these songs are so important because of Peter Quill's mom, like that like plays so well, like that, like it was interesting. I love that they built on the Zune payoff, or whatever, the Zune setup. I guess they paid off the Zune setup from the end of Volume 2. So it's like, now you can have movies up to when the Zune came out, or sorry, music up to when the Zune came out. So you have 90s and you have 2000s, and that's great. But it's still the sort of like the fact that Star-Lord, and by extension, everyone else in this group, and by extension everyone on this celestial skull, all sort of have to deal with essentially like his mom's musical tastes, is like wonderful. So every time one of those songs starts, if there's any kind of I don't know, like inkling of just sort of like, that's kind of a weird, like we're doing another Beastie Boys song. Okay. Like we always have Beastie Boys songs, but like it tracks so well with what's happened within the story. And now I can't remember the term, and maybe Jen does, for is it diegetic versus non-diegetic. There's diegetic reasons for why why all these songs are there in the movie. So the ones I was going to say are exactly the ones that Colby said. So instead, I'll just note that when in that post-credit scene, when they're having the conversation of like, quick, like, who's your favorite artist, and they're all naming people, Adam Warlock mentions an art and prog rock guy that's like one of my guys, Adrian Belew, both solo and King Crimson, which was both awesome and devastating given Adam Warlock's character and how he's like just a big dumb baby. So I was just sort of like, great, like that's good, that's a fair cop, you got me. So
yeah, and I really like so to clarify what you asked me about a second ago, the film shifts from diegetic sound or music to non-diegetic, and actually very frequently, where it's like, because like Rocket will have, or Peter will have the headphones in, and it'll be kind of that like muffled sort of version of the song, and then once like a big action moment hits or something like that, then it like blows up open, and it could, I mean, technically it still could be playing diegetically in the scene, but the way that the sound changes, it then becomes kind of like the version of the song was layered onto the scene, as opposed to like playing somewhere in the scene. So I noticed that happening way more, actually. And like, granted, I haven't seen Volume 1 and 2 super recently, but to me, it felt like there was a lot more shots of characters listening to music than just the music, like just the needle drops, like non-diegetically. Yeah. So I really like that, because I think it really brings it back to the roots. Like a lot of the things that I loved about this film were like very earnest callbacks to like why people fell in love with this branch of the MCU to begin with, and like the music is a huge part of that, right? That's what really makes it stand out. I put on the Guardians of the Galaxy mixtape playlist just randomly all the time, right? Like it's just really good. Like I wish I could have gotten James Gunn to like DJ my wedding or something like that. You know what I mean? Like he's got it. He's good. He should be using his talents for better purposes, and he will.
Well, if Lucasfilm is listening, maybe they can tell James Gunn to listen, and then he can make playlists for us. Just send him over. longtakereview.substack.com.
You'd probably do it.
All right. So I want to kind of, for the sake of time, jump right to sort of like where do we place this in the larger context of the MCU? So like, how does this compare to the other Guardians films? How does this compare to other MCU films? Like, I'm not asking for a formal ranking necessarily, but like, roughly where does this film fall kind of in the pantheon of Marvel movies?
Well, I'll say, and I'm not going to say that, this is an unpopular opinion, but I don't know if it's a commonly held opinion. The first Guardians movie is my favorite Marvel movie, like easily, like without any real the only real competition is the first Avengers movies, because those are the two that I just had the most joyous experience watching them in the theater at like the real, like the realization of like this translation of comic books to and wasn't like, I didn't grow up like a huge comic book head, but just the idea of this sort of genre movies being done so well and so successfully. So it's not better than that, because I love the first Guardians movie. And I really love Volume 2. It's hard for me to say anything bad about a movie so prominently featuring Kurt Russell. I would think if I went back and rewatched all of them, I think I might like 3 a little more than 2. But provisionally, I'm going to put it 3 in third, only because I don't want to give 2 short shrift, because I did really like that movie as well. But my guess is, after a couple of viewings of sort of all 3 of them as a being of a piece, I think 3 pushes up over 2.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. One, for me, I am going to put 3 ahead of 2. Just number 1 for recency bias, and number 2, I remember watching. I believe I've only watched Volume 2 once. I don't think I've rewatched it, even though it hit Disney Plus and whatnot. And I remember enjoying it, lots to like, but it wasn't something that just called me back. But the first Guardians movie did, and I can see this one doing the same thing. So that's sort of like, that's my sliding scale of where movies go, is how much does it stay with me throughout the few days after. Do I find myself drifting off and thinking about a scene or a line? I'm doing that with this movie. I didn't necessarily do that with the second one, and that's not a critique at all against that one. So I would go with Guardians 1, then 3, then 2. Although I really love seeing the Guardians interacting with all the other characters through Infinity War and Endgame. So it's Infinity War and Endgame. So I would probably watch those movies just for the Guardians interaction before I watched any of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but that's just me. And again, it's not a critique against any of these movies, because they're tremendous fun. But yeah, I love watching the Groot and Rocket and Thor scenes in Infinity War. I love what's the scene where Tony Stark calls Rocket Build-A-Bear. So much fun. Just seeing these characters inserted into those other characters is just a joy for me. So yeah, but just a great strong performance for the Volume 3, and I would put it second to the first one. I will say also that I'm sorry, Jen, but this is my favorite movie since No Way Home. If we're talking about the larger MCU, this is my favorite movie since No Way Home. So, if we're gonna put all these in categories, you've got your Civil Wars and your End Games and your Black Panthers at like the peak, and then you've got your Winter Soldiers, Ragnaroks, sort of second level, Ultron, Thor 2, Iron Man 3 as a third level, and then sort of like all of Phase 4. Like, right. This one definitely for me goes in that second level category. Right there is just very strong, very enjoyable, Ragnarok level, in my opinion. And I think Ragnarok was fantastic.
If we discount the Marvel Sony movies, right? Like if they don't count in the running, is this your favorite movie since Endgame?
I'll include the Marvel Sony movies. Like, this is better than No Way Home for me. And I had a good time at No Way Home, but I am very confident. I mean, again, I just like Guardians of the Galaxy a lot. I mean, obviously like Spider-Man a lot too, but I'm very confident I will want to watch Guardians 3 more than I'll want to go back. I'll want to watch scenes from No Way Home, but I don't know when I'm going to be like, I got 3 hours to spend to watch No Way Home. Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to think how many Marvel movies would I rank better than this after Guardians 2. And I think it's, I mean, obviously the two Avengers movies, I would say that's obvious, and Black Panther. But like, even like Ragnarok, I'm like, yeah, this is probably on the same level as Ragnarok. Like, I think so, and then, No Way Home's creep in there too, but it's up there. I think it probably ends up in my Marvel top 10. I just pulled up my old list. I haven't updated it since Endgame, which maybe speaks to how I've been feeling about Marvel movies since then, but I haven't updated it. And I had Guardians 2 at number 10, right next to Infinity War, and so I kind of feel like that's again, that area where it would be lower half of the top 10.
For me, I don't think Volume 3 could knock the first one out, but I feel like that's largely because it's the quote unquote the one that started it all. Like, I think as a first entry into a brand new, like, very few people even knew who these characters were from the comics, right? Like, people were like, who are these heroes? Like, what? Like, the fact that they managed to turn it into what they did, I think, is so amazing. So I think it would be hard for me to kind of like take the number one spot of the trilogy from the first one. But here's the thing. I feel like my favorite thing about James Gunn is his appreciation for things that are grotesque yet cute. So, like, my favorite part of Suicide Squad is that, like, Weasel guy. He's the best. I want to take him home. He's so great. And like, the conversation I had with my husband John was like, yeah, it's like I love that guy, and he was like, he's not cute, and I was like, this is where we do it, right? So, like, I'm like, yes, he is. He's adorable and hilarious. So for me, Volume 3 is like that in spades, right? Where it's like, because we get the whole, like, it's like we get so many characters that are kind of like that on both sides, right? In the flashbacks, obviously we have all of Rocket's friends. They're adorable. I love them all. And then with Adam Warlock, we have like the Lothcat knockoff. Like, it's like, and I wasn't particularly attached to him in the way that I was like Lila and Tisa Floor, but like, he was funny. He was cute. I like that I was appreciated that he was there. So yeah, so that's sort of what would potentially edge it for me, especially like years from now. Like, if I were to rewatch all of them, like this, it might be like, sort of to call back our Star Wars Day conversation with Red Cast, like, it might be a Return of the Jedi situation where I'm like, but that one's kind of my personal, like I love that one. It's my personal favorite in my heart, but like, I acknowledge that it's maybe not the objectively best one. But yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at right now. Does anyone, because I kind of want to wrap things up, does anyone have any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't cover that you thought was really important?
The only thing I'll say is it's interesting. We framed the discussion earlier, but like, how does this change the way you're feeling about Marvel? Part of part of why I feel like this resonated so well and I loved it so much was because it didn't feel like it had to be plugged into these other ongoing narratives. It was just the story of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is sprawling in its own way. I mean, we have like 7, 8, 9 main characters that we're following in this movie, but there wasn't that scene of just like, and here's the new Falcon, like coming in and doing something. Like, it didn't have those MCU connections, which are not always a problem. They're not always a bad thing. But it did sort of feel like, both from the location of the story and also the structure of it, it's just sort of off doing its own thing. So whatever the response is to this, it feels like critically, people really reacted well to it. I know it's like, hasn't made quite as much money as people thought it might, but they don't know like if it's going to have legs. I don't know what this really says about Marvel going forward, not just because James Gunn's leaving, but because it just did sort of feel like it's off on its own thing, closing off a story from what I think arguably might, started in what might have been the strongest phase, like that sort of second phase of movies, when you had Winter Soldier, you had Iron Man 3, which I love. Maybe some people don't. I don't know. I think that's one of the strongest Marvel movies. And then Guardians, that like run was when it was just like, oh, they're cooking. They're really like taking the ball and running with it. So it does, it's interesting. I think people are going to react well to it. I don't know if anyone's going to be like, okay, good, I feel good about the Marvels now. It's just sort of like, do you feel any differently about that because of what happened here? It felt very independent.
That's another $1 million question, is this whole where like is Marvel back thing, and I think we keep on waiting for it after every movie that drops, right? Like um Wakanda Forever, is Marvel back? Ant-Man, is Marvel back? I think the answer was no after that. Then we're asking the same question again, and I just I don't I'm gonna say the same thing that I say to most things, which is just non-committal and say we'll see question mark we'll see. um I'm gonna go see them, but Marvel knows that I'm gonna go see them. They know that you're gonna go see them, and that's the thing, is like, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What your question, Jen, was, who does this film appeal to? That's the same question that needs to be asked for the Marvels and so on and so forth. I felt like, I agree with you, PT. So many seeds were planted in phase 2, and then they were reaped in phase 3. I kept telling myself through phase 4, like, oh, they're planting seeds again. But this is more like, I haven't caught on to the strategy yet. And I know we're talking about, the multiverse saga, but I don't know what that means. I knew what the Infinity Stones meant. I knew what, and it's not because I read the comics, because I didn't. I knew what, because the movies were telling me, and they would, drop Thanos in a post-credit scene and be like, "Okay, I'm gonna go do this myself now." I'm like, "Oh no, that's a big deal, right?" And then little by little, it started to come all together. I just don't see that cohesiveness yet through what we've seen. I've enjoyed so much of it. I'm so glad we have it, but we're calling this the multiverse saga. I just don't know what that means yet. So again, it's a wait and see thing for me. Um, they clearly have a plan, but going back to our first subject, what's the Writers Guild strike going to do to that? Time frames, quality. Gosh, it's a complicated subject, but that's why we have podcasts, so we can talk about it, right?
Yes, and this is not the last conversation we're going to have about this. I'm
No.
almost certain. So, yeah, I think just as a closing thought, to me, and this is mostly speculation, but I feel like I have been thinking about this and reading about this and listening to other people talk about this a lot since Endgame. But I feel like there was a miscommunication between, or a lack of communication between Marvel and the fans, where Endgame finished and they were like, Phase 4 has some stuff, and everyone kind of sorry, that was really vague. But all the fans were like, great, we're just doing it again, like the clock has restarted, basically. I think that was everyone's expectation, right? That like, oh, Endgame finished, let's just start again from ground zero and do it all again, because we love that, don't we want to do it again? Whereas I feel like Marvel seems, in retrospect, seems like they had a different attitude, where they're like, okay, let's take a breather, like we just finished Endgame, we made tons of money, great job everybody, let's take us some time to play around in the sandbox and make the sandbox bigger, and like, let's do this over here, let's do this over here, let's not worry about how it's all going to tightly snap together in a bigger storyline just yet, and sort of let's see what people like and let's see what works and whatever, and kind of pick up threads up as they go. At least that's what it seems to me now at this point in the process, right? Where like, because a lot of things that I remember when I was writing my reviews, I way over speculated about the significance of certain things and like what that meant for the future. None of that basically has panned out, right? Like, or there's no evidence. It might still something like the beacon in Shang-Chi could still be very important at some point, I guess.
Mephisto, he's almost here, Jen. Mephisto's almost here.
Right. But yeah, so that's what I think is the problem. It's just it's a perception, reception, communication problem. And is that to say that the future is bleak? No, but I do agree that this, because of James Gunn's his like the point he is in his career and what he is doing next, I feel like we can't really use this as a litmus test for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that again, I don't. This isn't like breaking information or amazing analysis, but I think that the Marvel movies or the MCU kind of trained people how to watch the movies up to Endgame, with the whole Infinity Saga of just like, and this is how they work, and this is how they interconnect, and this is how they lead into the next one. And then Endgame happened, and it did sort of feel like there was like, okay, let's explore the space a little bit. And people were like, no, I'm following the crumbs. Like, you taught me to do all of these things. Like, this is all coming together. There's another big person coming, right? There's some other thing. And I think that it's easy to sort of forget, those initial stage. And I was having this conversation the other day with a couple of friends about how, like, that first phase of Marvel movies, like, were they that good? Like, like Iron Man was great, and then it was like, okay, like, it kind of depends on, how much did you like that first Thor movie? Like, that's the one that I enjoyed the second most after Iron Man, and even then I'm like, it was, I don't know if I would have been like, this is going to be like at least a 4-movie franchise with crossovers into like 3 or 4 other movies. I didn't think that. Some people love that first Captain America, but like, there's the Incredible Hulk, and there's Iron Man 2. It's sort of like, I felt like only that, like, that first Whedon Avengers is when it all started to sort of click into place. So there is maybe some degree of, it would be nice that if we could, as audiences, extend some grace to them to sort of kind of stumble their way around. But then it also feels like, as a company, both sort of Marvel and then its parent company have stretched themselves really thin, trying to get content onto streaming and also do movies, and that's created a bunch of problems in many ways. So yeah, I don't know how that will all be solved, and I think, this movie isn't the answer one way or the other.
And I think something that we cannot leave out of this type of conversation here, which I think is such an interesting conversation to have. We can't have it without talking about the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
because the effects that the pandemic had on all of movies, all of streaming, all of production of anything is absolutely undeniable, and the MCU has not escaped that. And you can see the effects of that all over Phase 4, and I'm not sure that we've really gotten out of that yet. Maybe Guardians. I think this one probably was the one that even pre-production was still in the pandemic, but probably the filming and post-production certainly was afterwards. But so much of Phase 4 and the adjustments that Marvel had to make on so many fronts affected that. So you said, PT, very well. As an audience, let's extend some grace. I that's the number one thing on the list when I vote yes on that proposition, right? They tried to manage this thing through a pandemic, and then add, you brought up streaming, the explosion of hours of content that they then created through the pandemic and post that after that. So I sort of feel like this whole MCU thing is a brand new thing now, maybe fittingly because of after Endgame,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're all still learning our way. Again, PT, you brought the point of, we're just going to follow what you told us to follow. And they're like, no, we've really shifted and you guys haven't figured this out yet, but you will. So, there's a reason we're sitting here talking about it. 20x films into this MCU. I still have faith that they're, going to keep entertaining us, keep telling us good stories, and pay off on a lot of these seeds that they're planting again. And I just think, as an audience, at some point, I think we're going to catch up. So I have faith. I have faith in it.
And even if not all of the movies in Phase 4 and now Phase 5 have worked totally, for me, looking back, there are key characters they've introduced that I really like.
Yes.
And
Yep.
and so I feel like this film, to bring it back to volume 3 of Guardians of the Galaxy, this film is a testament to when you have good characters that are fully fleshed out and have clear arcs that and can progress and develop in front from movie to movie, right? And that when you put them together, sparks fly. I feel like we can get back to that Avengers Assemble place again. You know what I mean? It will look very different,
Yeah.
but I feel like
Mhm.
the magic of, hey, wouldn't it be fun to see Kate Bishop trying to talk to Moon Knight, right? Like that's hilarious. That sounds great to me. You know what I mean? Like I want to see those crossover moments. I think that potential is still very much there. And this movie is a good model for that. So hopefully, even though James Gunn is going to be gone, they can still sort of like learn a lot of that about what worked for this movie. So
I know we keep being like, this is the last thing to wrap up. But there's something I did think of that I didn't put in the document, and that I want to throw out there or see what people think about this. Does this movie in any way change your expectations or thoughts about the upcoming Superman movie that James Gunn is going to write and direct? Because I feel like for me, I left it being just like, I think he's going to do a great Superman movie, and I have no idea why. I don't know what happened in this movie. Like, that thought came to me, and I was like, nothing in this movie is like a Superman movie. Nothing, there's nothing that like occurred that was like that different. You know what I mean? Like, but I was just sort of like, man, I feel like his Superman movie could be great, because that's been the concern is, he likes squishy, gross, like the sort of trauma background of James Gunn, which fits so well with Guardians and the Suicide Squad. Does that fit with Superman? But there was something about, that maybe the emotional through lines and the character moments being and arcs being constructed so well, where I was like, oh, that could be really great. Like he could do an amazing Superman movie. Am I alone? Did either of you think about this until just now?
I did not, but now that you're saying it, I feel like for me it's the earnestness and the sincerity of Guardians that's at its core that I feel like could translate really well to Superman. So if it's like if the world around Superman in this movie that we're going to get is the squishy, weird, googly-eyed, like is it like all the James Gunn stuff, but then Clark Kent and Superman has that kind of like almost childlike sincerity that we see in character, like all of the Guardians basically in one form or another. You know what I mean? Like just take Mantis for example, who we somehow miraculously did not mention this entire podcast, which is a crime against humanity, because she's great. But if we think about Mantis as a character, right? She's both complex but also innocent and sincere and good, right? Like she's, and I feel like, I'm not trying to be like Mantis is the next Superman, like that doesn't make any sense. But there's something there where like that proves to me that James Gunn is capable of writing a Superman.
I just want to say that I love Mantis so much. So much. She one of the biggest laughs in Infinity War when Drax says, "What is it when?" I will talk about Superman. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but I have to say this because I bring it up every chance I get. But when they're all on Titan, and Tony Stark looks at them and says, "What is it that you do?" And Drax goes, "Take names." No, what does it say? Kicks names, takes ass. And Mantis is just standing next to him, just confidently agreeing. Yes, I love Mantis. But one of the reasons that I think we talked about how we're encouraged, but for the DCU after this movie, I just feel like Superman by proxy is filled in with that whole feeling. And to go further with that, though, is I think that James Gunn really understands tone. And Jen, you brought it up, the earnestness and the heart of that's at the heart of the Guardians. He just blew that up and made a wonderful trilogy. So I think he understands what Superman is and what kind of movie it needs to be, and I think he will expertly blow that up into what it needs to be because he just understands that aspect of filmmaking, I think.
It's not going to be Man of Steel. That's all. That's and I can't believe that's where we're ending, but that's where we're ending. All right. So we've gone on long enough. This has been an amazing conversation. If you're still with us listening, like, let's hang out. Because if you're still here, we must be friends.
Or you're an employee at Lucasfilm.
Oh, true. Yes, apparently. We've got our ear to the grindstone for sure. Colby, thank you so much for coming on. I knew you're going to bring your Marvel A game. This was great. Tell us a little bit about the Colby cast and where people can find you.
Thank you, Jen. I was so excited when you reached out and asked if I would do this, and I'm so glad that I did, and it's something I looked forward to so much. And meeting you, PT, I have a new friend. Very happy about that. So thanks again for having me on. Yeah, the Colby cast. is a place that I wanted to start talking about all this stuff, honestly, and I come at things from a fan's perspective. I don't have a ton of critic chops on me. I will try to get a little bit cerebral sometimes, but most of the time I have my boys on with me, my 2 adult sons who are in their early 20s, and we talk about stuff that we like to watch. Marvel and Star Wars are very, very much represented. And we take it like we're sitting on the couch talking to each other like we would in the living room. And love the fact that they're joining me with this and doing this. And then when they get too busy, I have wonderful people like yourself, Jen, or our friend Greg Cass, and other friends that I've made along the way. So we just look to have fun. We look to celebrate this fun storytelling. Really is what it is, whether it's through streaming, television shows, movies, whatnot, and we have fun with it. So you can find it on Twitter. You can find us on all the podcatchers out there, as well as Instagram at the Colby Cast, spelled out like my name, COLBY. Everything else is there. So yeah, we have a lot of fun. We've cracked 100 episodes, and if you look down the episode list, you don't know what you're going to find. We've talked about Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, if it's out there, we even talk about I had my dad on at one point. We just talked to my dad for an hour, and that was so much fun because he's a great guy. So go check that episode out. But yeah, anything is on the table and we have a blast. So thanks again, Jen. I really appreciate having me on.
No, thank you for coming. And I love the Colby Cast. Like, the three of you oftentimes bring such different perspectives. Some of it's multi-generational, some of it's just different. You like different things, and it's always a joy to listen to. So yeah, everyone should go check that out. PT, I feel like I've asked you this so many times, I can't think of a more fun way to ask you, but where can folks attempt to find you on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, they can look for me on Instagram and Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. I keep saying I'm going to try to be more active and post more, but I'm mostly just reading other people's things, looking at posts, liking them, and just doing things there. But people are welcome to contact me at those places.
And you can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Instagram, and Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. And if you are not already a subscriber to The Long Take, I am almost done. I was really trying to get it done before we recorded. Almost done with my Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 review. Keep an eye out for that. Hopefully I'll have that done by tomorrow. Thank you both again, and thanks for listening. Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.